Hello and welcome, history fans, to History Play-by-Play. Today we take a little bit of a deeper dive on the Constitution and what exactly is in there.
In all alone. Dangle, shot. He scores!
So before we go into summaries of what is in the Constitution, I'm not going to go line by line. You can do that on your own. The basic overarching thing is that it establishes the three branches of our government and what their roles are. And those three branches are the executive branch, which is led by the president. The executive branch is to enforce the laws. It is our national leadership, basically dictating the path of the country, and informal foreign affairs, because sending all of Congress to go talk to other countries would be a nightmare. The legislative branch, which is led by Congress, which is both the House and the Senate, makes the laws, handles the budgets, the power of the purse is there, and ratifies international treaties, making formal things that the president has set up and negotiated. And the judicial branch, which is led by the Supreme Court, interprets the laws, overrule laws that are unconstitutional, and strike them off the books. These three branches are designed to have checks and balances, that each branch has ways to basically smack down other branches of government when they are out of line. And the whole purpose of this is to make sure that no one branch can gain too much power. The Constitutional Convention became what it is because the Articles of Confederation failed. And we were more willing to create a government that is a little more centralized and much more powerful than the Articles, in part because we saw that weak government failed, and in part because a lot of the hardline anti-British government people had grown too old to be a participant in this. We're talking about the next generation of the American founders, for the most part. I mean, you figure like Alexander Hamilton was a young officer in the army, and now he is someone who was very important as far as founding the nation. So we see the next wave and realizing that we need some centralized government, but that doesn't mean that fear is gone. And it's definitely important that each branch is able to keep the other two branches in check and make sure that no one gets too high. It's all about smacking them down so that everyone... And it is also meant to be deliberately slow. By having those checks and by smacking down the other branches of government, it makes it so that it is more deliberative and that rush decisions won't be made, that there's enough time to go through and make sure every decision is the right one. It's meant, by design, to be slow and convoluted so that no one can rush to power. Take that for what it's worth. Now, I'm not going to go through the actual text of each one. Let's just talk about what each of the articles does within the Constitution. The Constitution is divided up into articles, which, yes, may be a bit confusing with the Articles of Confederation. Sorry. If you want to go through the actual text, super easy to find the Constitution. You can actually get printed copies for free from many different organizations. This is meant to be a summary, a TLDR, so that you can have a basic look. And when you read this, when you read the actual Constitution, you can have some frame of reference. The first article is the legislative branch, which was generally considered to be the most important of the three branches of Congress. Even though they're all meant to have checks and balances, the Congress was expected to be the leader of policy. They established the roles for both houses of Congress. They talk about how a bill becomes a law, which Schoolhouse Rock definitely explains better than the Constitution does. The powers of Congress, which more or less include maintaining the Army and Navy. Mail is constitutional. That's how important the mail is. Their powers to create courts, their power to declare war, the power to raise money, and the power of the budget. Congress is the one that establishes where funds go and what funds are collected. And so any other threats of anyone else trying to control funding is a moot point. It's not real. And furthermore, if another branch of government tries to do something big and Congress says, well, good luck, we're not giving you money on it, that's a check. That's an important check and balance, that the executive branch can go do something, but until Congress says, yeah, we'll fund it, does it really get done? The elastic clause, also known as the necessary and proper clause, gives the leeway for Congress to do anything that is both necessary and proper. The The great thing about the Constitution is how vague it is, and it gives the power to the senators and the representatives to create laws as they see fit. Because, I mean, let's face it, the Founding Fathers would have no clue what's going on in how you're watching this, how I'm recording this, how I'm presenting any of this. None of this could possibly enter their minds. So how can we have laws based on it unless we have a very flexible document? It also establishes limits, habeas corpus, which is one of those key ideas that is left in the Latin. Basically, why you're arrested. There has to be cause. There has to be reason for you to be detained. Ex post facto laws. If you do something and then someone says that should be a crime, you can't be arrested for it because they make it a law after you did it. So if you find a new novel way to cheat on something and there was no law against it, they can't get you for it unless it's contained in something else. And the bill of attainder to make sure that you cannot be called guilty until you have had a trial. Article 2 is the executive branch. Not a lot in it, to be completely honest. It is very short. There's a president and a vice president who will serve 4-year terms. That president must be a natural-born citizen and at least 35 years of age. It establishes the Electoral College of how to pick the president, and that is far too complicated for me. I highly recommend CGP Grey, another YouTuber, for finding just how the Electoral College works and the shortcomings of it. It establishes that the president is the commander-in-chief of the military. There's a civilian commander in charge of our military. It establishes pardon power, which I talked about in the impeachment videos, that allows the president to negotiate treaties, to pick judges, which is a check on the judicial branch, and it also includes the instructions for impeachment. Article 3, the judicial branch, the largely forgotten branch, at least until you get Marbury v. Madison. It's the Supreme Court, what kind of cases go to the Supreme Court, and it defines what treaties are, which the Supreme Court has some jurisdiction over. Article 4 are the states, and basically the rights guaranteed there. And it more or less copies the things of the articles. The states will honor laws of other states. In that age, marriages was a big one. Driver's license. I mean, look, if you get a driver's license in Virginia, it's going to work in Maryland. It's not like you're going to need a new driver's license in each state. And guilty in one state is guilty in all. You can't just commit a crime in New York and flee to Connecticut and say that you're fine. Not how that works. Article 5 establishes how to amend the Constitution. The way to do that is a constitutional amendment is approved by the House and the Senate, and then 2/3 of the state legislatures, which currently rest at, I believe, 38 states. Or there is a backdoor way to do this, but it has never been used. 2/3 of the states call for a convention. That's, again, 38 states call for a convention, and amendments are proposed there. And then those amendments go to the states, and 3/4 of the states then have to approve it. It's a high bar. It's never been done. Article 6 is miscellaneous. The U.S. is going to retain debts from the Articles of Confederation. That's very important on the international stage, because whenever you have a revolution and start a new government, you could say, you know, oh, this money, you know, someone comes knocking for that money, and you go, well, that's not us. That's the previous government. You got to go find them. Well, they don't exist. Well, it looks like you're out your money. And if you do that, foreign countries really don't like that and are less likely to work with you or acknowledge that you're the legitimate government. So, in a very, very smart move, the Constitution assumes the debts we had from the Revolution and gained under the Articles of Confederation, and we will retain that. It establishes that the Constitution will be the supreme law of the land. One of those things where it's just probably good to make sure it's stated there, no assumptions made. And elected officers will swear allegiance to defend the Constitution when taking office, which I'm sure you've seen in many, 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 many different places. And finally, Article 7 is approval. 9 of the 13 states must ratify the Constitution before it goes into effect, which is not how you amend the Articles. You need all 13 states. This would be how you pass any laws. So they finesse those ways with the Articles of Confederation to make sure that it does get through. Now, there is one thing in the Constitution that we really ought to talk about, because it was there and it is no longer. The blight on the Constitution is its approach to slavery. The Constitutional Convention genuinely tried to avoid slavery, but Southern states simply wouldn't let it rest. Because when it came to proportional representation, which was the big push of the larger states, which a number of which were southern states, especially Virginia. The question was, does a slave count as part of the population? Do you count that in the numbers for how many representatives you get? And the northern states, the states without slavery, argued that, well, they can't vote. So if you're not going to let them vote, then you get these representatives. It's counted for representation, but they don't actually vote for that representation. That doesn't make any sense. Which basically it means that southern white men get more representation in those slave states because the states count for more representatives, but they can't vote for those representatives. So it's a disproportionate method. This is not acceptable to northern states because why would you give more representation to the South for an abhorrent thing that should not exist? Why are you benefiting from this thing that you know is a peculiar institution? Not to mention the obvious contradiction that if you're counting the slave as a human for representation, but you do not consider them to be a human, you consider them to be property, how does that work? How do you square that? That's a significant problem. Look, if you understand the rationales of slavery and slaveholders, you probably should think about your mindset. It's not right. They are playing both ends and trying to game the system. And the sad part is that they somewhat succeeded. There would be a compromise. It's called the Three-Fifths Compromise, where slaves would count as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of representation only. When you're counting Virginia's population, its state population, every 5 slaves would be counted as 3. And that is what makes the Constitution pass. It was necessary to kowtow to these slave owners in order to get those states on board to ratify the Constitution and ensure this country has success. Because without the Constitution, we would have broken up into many independent nations and probably had a history of warring amongst ourselves like Europe did. But it also makes the slavery a part of our founding documents. It's part of our founding laws, and we cannot escape that. And clearly we still have not dealt with that in any significant way that makes the problem go away. We have not gone past this legacy. So the Three-Fifths Compromise was a necessary evil, emphasis on evil, that just makes it really, really tough to be, okay, the Constitution is an amazing, wonderful document, except, and obviously this would be struck out following the Civil War, but the history remains. In order to ratify that Constitution, not only did we need the Three-Fifths Compromise, but there was a lot of debate over should we. And just like I talk about in the political parties video, there are 2 camps. The Federalists who want the Constitution and the Anti-Federalists who are very much afraid of a government having that much power. And really that's the overarching theme of our political history. Who has power? The federal government or the states? That's it. The Federalist Papers, 3 Federalists, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, would write a number of Federalist Papers, of essays saying why we need this Constitution. I include some important ones. Pause it if you want to read more. Maybe I can do more on the Federalist Papers. But essentially, they're what convinces most people to say, yes, this Constitution's a good thing. The other big promise, and probably the most important of the promises, is that in order to get the Anti-Federalists to sign on to the Constitution, we promised that there would be a Bill of Rights. 10 amendments that would establish the basic rights of people, codifying them, putting them in writing, so there's no assumptions made, there's no wiggle room, well, I mean, there's less wiggle room, that the things the government absolutely cannot do to guarantee the rights of the people. Since then, we now have 27 total amendments. You figure, 10 were made in the 1700s. We have had 17 since. That's pretty crazy when you really think about it. In 200 years, 17 things have made it past. And perhaps that's one of the great factors of the Constitution, that it is so hard to amend, but when something is important enough, it can be amended. It's just a very, very high bar. And so frivolous things don't end up getting included. And As of the latest numbers I could get, and it should be 27, so 11,770 constitutional amendments have been proposed. That includes 71 in the previous Congress, which should say 2017 to 18. That's a ton. 11,770 proposed, 27 have made it. Not bad. Not bad at all. So we'll talk about those Bill of Rights in a subsequent video, but that is the Constitution, and all I got for you. That's the end of the episode. What you just saw is this teacher's interpretation of events. If you use this for a class, let me know how that went in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you can figure out how today's jersey matches the content, let me know in the comments. That's extra credit. I'm John Baranowski, and thanks for watching.